And with that, I will turn it over to Nur.
Thank you so much. Great to be here, everyone. Hello, hello. I will go ahead and share my presentation here with you. If I can just share my screen, give me 1 second. Oh, wait a minute. It says, oh, good. All right, we're in business here. Okay. Can you give me a thumbs up? You can hear me okay and you can see the presentation? Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. This is so exciting. It looks like we have a ton of people joining us today, which is really fantastic. Great to have you all here. Today, we're going to talk about what I think is the skill of the century. How do we become indistractable? Before we get into that, let me just introduce myself a bit here. So a few years ago, I wrote my first book, but the title was Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And this came out of a class that I taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, as well as the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design. And Hooked was all about how do we build the kind of products and services that can build healthy habits in people's lives? How do we build the kind of products and services that people use because they want to, not because they have to? And the book has been used in all sorts of different applications. It's been used by companies like Fitbod to help people get into the habit, get them hooked onto exercise. I worked with a company, Kahoot, the world's largest educational software, to get kids hooked onto learning. I've worked with companies like the New York Times to get people hooked to engaging with their local news. So there's all kinds of ways that we can use this psychology used by companies like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat to build healthy habits in users' lives. And that's really my goal with this first book, Hooked, was to democratize these techniques so that all of us can build the kind of products and services that build healthy habits in people's lives. Now, shortly after I wrote this book, I realized that there was a flip side to the psychology of building good habits. The flip side is that sometimes we build bad habits. And I had this experience in my own life that really made me reassess my own experience and relationship with distraction. And here's what happened. I had this afternoon with my daughter, and she's an only child, and we are head over heels in love with our daughter. And I remember this one particular afternoon, we had this book of activities that daddies and daughters could play together. And one of the activities in this book was to ask each other this question. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember the question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said, because in that moment, I thought that it was a good time to just look at this one quick thing on my phone, honey. I just have to do this one thing. And by the time I looked up from my phone, she was gone. She left the room and she decided that she got the message that I was sending, which was what was on my phone was more important than she was. And she decided to go play with some toy outside. And that's when I realized that I had blown it. I had blown this perfect daddy-daughter moment, and I really need to reassess my own relationship with distraction, because if I'm honest with you, it wasn't just when I was with my daughter. I would sit down at my desk to do some work on a big project, and somehow I do something else for the next 20, 30, 40 minutes instead of working on the thing I wanted to do. I would say I was going to exercise, and I wouldn't. I would say I was going to eat right, and I didn't. And I kept not doing the things that I myself said I was going to do. And so that's when I decided that if I could have any superpower, any realistic superpower, the superpower that I would most want would be the power to become indistractable. You see, becoming indistractable will be the skill of the century. There will be a bifurcation between two types of people in the world. The people who allow their time and their attention and their lives to be controlled and manipulated by others, and those who stand up and say, no, I am indistractable. I choose how I spend my time. I choose how I will focus my attention. I choose how I will spend my life. And so that's when I started this 5-year journey of research and testing to find out how we can all become indistractable, how we can all gain this skill of the century. And the place I started was a little surprising. You see, I thought the problem was all about these things, right? That it was all about the pings and dings and rings from our phones and computers and technology. And that's why I was shocked to find that the Greek philosopher Plato talked about this very same problem 2,500 years before the invention of the iPhone. Plato called it akrasia in the Greek, the tendency that we all have to do things against our better interests. And he wondered, why is it that even when we know what to do, we don't do it? Why do we act against our best interests? And if we thought that Plato had this problem, imagine what this problem looks like today. Because, Plato's generation and maybe even our grandparents' generation, they could complain that, well, they just didn't have the information. That's why they didn't do what they know they needed to do, because they didn't know how to do it, right? But today, who doesn't know, right? Who doesn't basically know how to eat more healthfully, right? We basically know. We know that chocolate cake isn't as healthy as a healthy salad. Who doesn't know that to do better at your job, you have to do the work, especially the stuff that the other people don't want to do? Who doesn't know that to be better in your relationships, you have to be fully present with people? We know this already. This is common sense. And frankly, if there's something you don't know, we Google it. It's all there for us to explore. The problem is no longer that we have a lack of information. The problem is that we can't stop getting distracted. We don't understand why we don't do what it is that we say we're going to do. So, how do we think about this problem of distraction? Well, the best place to understand what distraction is to understand the opposite of distraction. So think for yourself for a minute. What is the opposite of distraction? What's the antonym? If I said the word distraction, what's the opposite of distraction? Now, most people will say that the opposite of distraction is focus. But that's not exactly right. You see, the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. You see, both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull, and they both end in the same 6 letters. You see, they both end in the word action, A-C-T-I-O-N. So traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you do with intent, that lead you towards living out your values and being the kind of person you want to become. The opposite of traction is distraction. Any action that pulls you away from what you plan to do, that leads you away from becoming the person you want to become. So this is really important for 2 reasons. Number one, we have to realize that anything can become a distraction. How many times, if you're anything like I used to be, do you sit down at your desk and you say, okay, I'm going to do that big project. I'm not going to procrastinate. I'm not going to get distracted. I have to work on that big project. Here I go. I'm going to get started right away. Nothing's in my way. I'm going to do it. But first, let me just check email for a quick minute. Or let me just do that one thing on my to-do list. We'll get to why to-do lists are terrible for your productivity in just a minute. I want to sacrifice that sacred cow, and I'll tell you why to-do lists are killing your productivity. We'll get to that in a minute. But the point is, many times in our day, we allow distraction to trick us into prioritizing the urgent at the expense of the important, right? Because I got to check that email some point today, right? Isn't that a productive thing to do? Isn't that something work related that I got to get done? So that's productive, right? Wrong. It is just as much of a distraction as playing a video game or going on Facebook if it's not what you did with intent. Okay, so anything can become a distraction, and conversely, anything can be an act of traction. So many times today in the media, we hear about how technology is hijacking our brains, how it's manipulating everybody, how it's causing everyone to get addicted to technology. And I say, listen, I've looked at the research. That claim is rubbish. It is not true. And it's very elitist to try and tell people to stop using social media, stop checking email, go on a digital detox. It doesn't work, right? Because we need these things for our livelihoods. It's like telling someone who's going on a diet, just stop eating. It's not realistic, and it doesn't address the real problem. And the real problem is not the tools, because I would argue that any of those tools, if you want to go on Facebook or Instagram or watch a video on Netflix, there's nothing wrong with any of that, as long as you do it on your schedule, not someone else's. So the difference between traction and distraction is forethought, right? Using these tools on your schedule, not someone else's. Okay, so we've got traction, we've got distraction. Now, what leads us to these actions? What prompts us to either acts of traction or distraction, we have two types of triggers. The first kind of trigger is called an external trigger. An external trigger are these pings and dings and rings, all of these things in our outside environment that leads us to either traction or distraction. And this is what people tend to blame when they think about distraction, right? It's all these things in our outside environment, our cell phones, our social media accounts, our kids, all of these things that cause distraction. But what I discovered in my research was quite surprising, that the number one source of distraction, the leading cause of distraction, is not the external triggers, but in fact, it is the internal triggers. What are internal triggers? Internal triggers are these uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape from. You see, if we are going to answer Plato's 2,500-year-old question of why do we do things against our better interest, we have to dig a layer deeper. We have to understand the nature of human motivation. Why do we do anything and everything? So most people will tell you that motivation is all about carrots and sticks, right? Freud called this the pleasure principle. It's about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. We've all heard this in some form or another. Turns out, neurologically, it's not true. That neurologically speaking, we do not do what we do because of the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, but rather we do everything we do for just one reason. And that one reason is the desire to escape discomfort. Everything we do is about a desire to escape discomfort. Even the desire to feel pleasure is psychologically destabilizing, right? Wanting, craving, desire, lusting. There's a reason we say love hurts, because neurologically, that's exactly what's going on. And so if you think about this, this is called the homeostatic response, and it makes perfect sense physiologically, right? If you go outside and it's cold, the brain says, oh, wait a minute, this is too cold, this is uncomfortable, put on a jacket. And if you walk back inside and now it's too warm, now the brain says, oh, that's not comfortable, take it off. If you feel hunger pangs, you eat. And if you eat too much, oh, now you're stuffed, that doesn't feel good, you stop eating. So everything we do is about a desire to escape discomfort when it comes to our physiological sensations. The same holds true for our psychological sensations. Let me ask you, where do we go when we're feeling lonely? We check Facebook. What do we do when we're feeling uncertain? We Google. And what about when we're feeling bored? Oh, lots of solutions to boredom. We check the news, stock prices, Pinterest, Reddit. There's so many solutions to this uncomfortable sensation of boredom. So the big aha here, what we have to realize is that if we don't understand this fact, that time management is pain management. Let me say that again. Time management is pain management. If we don't start with that understanding, then nothing else works. You see, I've read all of the productivity books. I've read all the life hacks. I've listened to all the webinars, and I will tell you, none of that stuff works unless we understand the discomfort that we are trying to escape from. So whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook, we will always get distracted by one thing or another if we don't first and foremost understand that we are driven to distraction because of these uncomfortable emotional states. Okay, so what do we do about this, right? What are we supposed to do with all these uncomfortable emotional sensations? Well, there are really only two potential options. We can either fix the source of the problem, figure out what it is that's causing us that discomfort. Maybe it's a difficult workplace environment, a hard home life situation, whatever it might be. Can we fix that problem that's causing us emotional distress? But the fact of the matter is, part of being a grown-up is that, you can't always fix every source of discomfort. That part of being alive is that sometimes we feel bad. And unfortunately, the self-help industry tells us that we're not supposed to feel bad, right? How many books have happiness in the title? And we're supposed to constantly be contented with everything all the time. But of course, that's not realistic. And in fact, that's not how we are designed. That our species is constantly designed with perpetual disquietude. That in fact, it's that discomfort that drives us forward, that helps us invent and create and make the world better, is because of those internal triggers that cause us to strive and advance our species. So we have to remember, feeling bad is not bad. It's about what we do with those internal triggers. What do we do with those uncomfortable sensations? Do we allow them to lead us towards distraction when we seek escape through our phones, through a drink, through who knows what? Or do we harness them like rocket fuel to lead us towards traction? So let me give you some very practical techniques that you can start using right now. It's just the tip of the iceberg compared to what's in the book, but I only have about 30 minutes or so, so I want to jam pack as much as I possibly can in terms of practical strategies that you can use, starting with what psychologists tell us the first step to dealing with these internal triggers is to note the sensation. That if you can simply write down for yourself, but physically write it down. Don't just note it in your head, but write it down on a piece of paper. What is that sensation? Boredom, loneliness, anxiety, fatigue. That's the first step to gaining greater agency and control over those internal triggers. Then what we want to do is to get curious about that sensation, not contemptuous. You see, most people, when it comes to distraction, they fall into two buckets. We call them the blamers or the shamers. The blamers, they tend to blame things outside themselves, right? It's the Facebook, it's my phone, it's my boss. I hear this a lot. It's the modern world these days. That's why I get distracted, right? They blame things outside themselves. But we can't change any of that stuff, right? That's futile. What are you going to get in a time machine to go to some magical time that never existed without distraction? You can't. And so we don't want to be blamers. We also don't want to be shamers. You see, shamers don't blame things outside themselves. They shame themselves. Now, what does that sound like? A shamer says to themselves when they get distracted, oh, you see, there I go again. I always get distracted. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Why am I so lazy? Maybe I'm not very good at this job. And they shame themselves. And ironically, the more shame we feel, the more internal triggers we feel. And what do we do when we feel more internal triggers that don't feel good? The experience of shame is terrible. Nobody likes to feel shame. We become more likely to seek escape from those uncomfortable emotions with, you guessed it, more distractions. So we don't want to be a blamer. We don't want to be a shamer. We want to be what we call a claimer. A claimer claims responsibility not for their feelings. Okay, this is a really important point. Most people don't realize this. You cannot control your urges and your feelings. That is not under your control. All you can control is how you respond, hence the word responsibility, to those feelings. So for example, if you feel the urge to sneeze, you can't control that urge. Once you have it, right? You didn't choose to feel the urge to sneeze. And the same goes for our feelings. You can't control the feelings. What you can control is how you respond to those urges and sensations and feelings. So when you feel the urge to sneeze, do you sneeze all over everyone and get them sick? Or do you get a handkerchief and cover your nose? Of course, you do the responsible thing and you cover your nose. So do you allow these internal triggers to lead you towards unhealthy distraction? Or do you respond to them in such a manner that leads you towards traction? So one technique that I use almost every single day is called the 10-minute rule. Here's how the 10-minute rule works. The 10-minute rule says that whenever you want to give in to something you think is a distraction, and this works just as well with that piece of chocolate cake you know you shouldn't eat, or that cigarette you shouldn't smoke, or checking Instagram or email real quick when you know you want to focus on something else, here's how the 10-minute rule works. The 10-minute rule says that you can give in to that temptation, but not right now. You can give into it in just 10 minutes, okay? You can give into it, but not right now, okay? In just 10 minutes. So many times I'll take out my phone and I say, okay, set the timer for 10 minutes. I'll put my phone down. And your job for those 10 minutes, you have two choices, right? Two potential paths. You can either get back to the task at hand, whatever it is that you were doing, working on that big project or whatever it is you were doing beforehand, you can either get back to that, or you can do what psychologists call surf the urge. Surfing the urge acknowledges that these urges and sensations, they crest and then they subside, right? Even though in the moment we feel like these things are going to last forever, they never do. The idea is to just sit with that sensation. So many times during those 10 minutes, my job is to just sit and think about what it is that I'm experiencing. Where is that sensation coming from? What's the origin? Okay. Not contemptuous, remember, curious, not contemptuous. Sitting with that sensation for a few minutes. And then what we will find is that we allow that sensation to crest and then subside just like a wave. So we want to surf it like a surfer on a surfboard. And what you will find if you use this technique, that by the time the 10 minutes are up, 9 times out of 10, that urge is gone. That sensation has alleviated itself, and you're back at work doing the thing you really wanted to do. So that's just one of many, many techniques. Everything in my book is research-backed. I hate these books of people who say, oh, I discovered this amazing new thing, but where's the research? Oh, I don't know. I didn't do any research. No, everything in the book is backed by peer-reviewed studies. There's over 30 pages of citations from credible peer-reviewed academic journals. It was very, very important to me to back everything up with real evidence. So please do check that out. But for the sake of time, I want to move on to the next step in becoming indistractable, and that is to make time for traction, okay? Now, here's the thing. Many people, including myself, a few years ago, before I learned how to become indistractable, I would complain about how, what's going on in the news is so distracting, and did you see what happened on Twitter, and my boss is distracting me, and my kids are distracting me, everything's so distracting these days. And then, when you ask folks, well, what is it that you plan to do with your time? Right? Show me your calendar. Turns out that 2/3 of Americans don't keep a calendar. And so here's the irony. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Let me say that again. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So I would complain about getting distracted, but if somebody looked at my calendar, you'd see lots of open white space. Right? Well, how could I complain? How did I have the right to complain that I got distracted from something if I didn't plan what it was I wanted to do? Because the fact of the matter is, these days, if you don't plan your day, somebody is going to plan it for you. The news, your boss, your kids, your spouse, Twitter, Facebook, somebody is going to eat up your time unless you decide in advance how you want to spend it. So one of the most research techniques and one of the most effective techniques to doing what you say you're going to do and becoming indistractable is making what we call a time-boxed calendar. A time-boxed calendar is very simply this technique that we use called making implementation intention, which is just a fancy way of planning out what we are going to do and when we are going to do it. Now, we make this schedule based on our values. What are values? Values are attributes of the person you want to become. Let me say that again. Values are attributes of the person you want to become. And so what we're going to do is we're going to imagine for ourselves, how would the person I want to become want to spend their day? Okay, you still have to put in the more mundane stuff like, showering and bedtimes and traffic and all that stuff. But in a realistic world, how would the person I want to become want to spend their day? And by planning your day, by making a time-boxed calendar, you become much more likely to do what it is you say you're going to do and live out those values. Principally because this is where we plan the time, now, not the output. Now, I know many of you do what I used to do, which is to keep a to-do list. A to-do list is a sacred cow that I would like to murder right now. To-do lists are likely destroying your productivity. Let me prove it to you. Almost every single person I've ever asked this question that I'm about to ask you gives the same exact answer, which is, when was the last time you didn't finish everything on your to-do list? Think for yourself. If you keep a to-do list, when was the last time you didn't finish everything on your to-do list? Almost every single person, almost 100% of every person I've ever asked this question to has the same answer. Oh, that would be today and yesterday and the day before that. And actually all this week, I never finish everything on my to-do list. So why do we keep using this technique that clearly is not working? You see, people don't realize that when they keep a to-do list, they are reinforcing the wrong self-image. And psychologists tell us that behavior change is identity change. So if day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, you are reinforcing your identity as someone who doesn't do what they say they're going to do, another day goes by, and it's okay that you didn't finish what you promised yourself you would get done, you are making that type of behavior part of your identity. And this is how we lose the war, right? Then it's all lost. Instead of judging yourself by what you finish, right? Your to-do list is a list of output. I want you to stop judging yourself by what you finish. Instead, what we do with a time box calendar is that we plan the input, not the output, right? Your to-do list is just a list of output, but what's your input? If you're a knowledge worker, your input is just two things, time and attention, right? So if you went to the baker and you said, hey, I need 100 loaves of bread. Well, the baker would say, I need flour, I need yeast, I need sugar, I need salt, I need the input to make the output. But somehow when it comes to knowledge workers, we never think about the output. We never think about the flour and the yeast and the sugar and the salt. We just think it's going to magically appear. Well, what's our input? It's time and attention. So I want you to stop planning the output and instead plan the input, to judge yourself not by finishing anything. Wait, what? What did Nir just say? I want you to stop judging yourself by finishing anything. Instead, your only metric of success with a time box calendar is to ask yourself, did you do what you said you would do for as long as you said you would do it without distraction? That's the only metric of success. Did you do what you said you would do for as long as you said you would without distraction? And if you did, that's all that matters. Because now you're reinforcing your self-image as somebody who does what they say they're going to do, someone who lives with personal integrity and is indistractable. Now, here's the kicker. The people who keep the time box calendars actually finish more. They are more productive than the people who keep the to-do list. So you will actually get more done using this technique. Part of what we need to plan in our day is time for concentrating. You see, there's two types of work. There's what we call reactive work and reflective work. Reactive work, you know what this looks like. It's reacting to the emails, reacting to the phone calls, reacting to all the people interrupting us throughout our day. And we need time in our day for that reactive work. That probably takes up most of your day. But most people don't carve out and protect any of that time for reflective work. These days, let me tell you, if you want a huge corporate advantage, give yourself time in your day to think, because almost nobody is doing it, right? We go through our days mindlessly and we have no time in our day to actually concentrate, to plan, to strategize. We know that we can only do our best work when we make that time, even if it's an hour, 45 minutes even in your day, to sit down and have that reflective work time, and don't let anybody else take that time away from you. Now, part of the reason that all this communicating can be so distracting is that it comes coupled with these external triggers, which we talked about earlier, the pings, the dings, the rings, the notifications, all of these things, which we know can lead us towards distraction. So what do we do about all those external triggers? Well, you know, there's actually one industry where external triggers are literally a matter of life and death. If I were to ask you to consider, what is the third leading cause of death in the United States of America? What's the third leading cause of death? I'll give you the first two. Number one is heart disease. Number two is cancer. I don't know what it is now with COVID, but in last year, it was those two things. The third leading cause of death, if it was a disease, would have been prescription mistakes. Believe it or not, 200,000 Americans every year are harmed when healthcare practitioners, doctors and nurses, give them the wrong medication or the wrong dosage of medication. This is a 100% preventable human error. And most hospitals just say, well, what are we going to do, right? People make mistakes, okay? Until a brave group of nurses at UCSF wanted to tackle this problem and figure out what was going on. And what they discovered was that the cause of this problem was nothing more than distraction. That every time nurses were dosing out medication, they were interrupted. Somebody was tapping them on the shoulder and interrupting them. A colleague, a doctor, somebody was interrupting them 10 times per dosing round. And they were constantly making mistakes every time they got distracted. Well, these nurses put their heads together and they came up with a solution that reduced this problem by 88%. They reduced prescription mistakes by 88%, believe it or not. You know what they did? It wasn't some multi-million-dollar program. It wasn't some amazing new app. It was plastic vests. Plastic vests that these nurses started wearing that told their colleagues, drug round in progress, do not disturb. And that signal to their colleagues almost eliminated this problem. Now, why am I telling you this story? I'm guessing very few of you are nurses. Why am I telling it to you? Because of course, the same thing happens to us all the time. And the tragedy is that we think we're doing a great job, right? We think we're doing all right. And we don't realize, just like these nurses didn't realize that they were hurting people, they were giving them the wrong medication until it was too late. We don't realize how much better our work output would be if we didn't keep making these mistakes that are caused by distraction. So how can we learn from these nurses and apply this to our own work life? Well, many of us are going to return after we're out of quarantine for COVID. We're going to return to the office. And many of us work in open floor plan offices, which are a hotbed of distraction. In fact, the number one source of distraction, according to a recent survey that the average American knowledge worker experiences, wasn't cell phones, it wasn't computers. The number one source of distraction was other people. So what do we do about this? Well, every copy of my book, Indistractable, comes with one of these. This is called a screen sign. And here's how you use it. You pull it out of the book. It's a piece of cardstock. You pull it out of the book, you fold it into thirds, and you put it on your computer monitor. And it tells your colleagues that, hey, I'm indistractable right now. Please come back later. Now, I know many of you, you're working from home. And if you're like me, you have a kid at home. So what do you do about the kind of distractions that don't come from your colleagues, but might come from your kids? Here's what you do. You show them your schedule. So that's what we did in the last step of making that time box schedule so that they know when you will be available. But you show them the times when you will not be available, when you need time to be indistractable. You need time to do that reflective work. But what if they still interrupt you because they can't tell when you're doing work that you can be interrupted versus you can't be interrupted? Here's what you do. Look around your house and find the funniest hat you have, okay? Go find the silliest hat you have. Here's mine. This is called the concentration crown. And when my daughter, starting at 5 years old, saw that daddy was wearing the concentration crown, she knew that that was time when I could not be interrupted, okay? So this is how we hack back external triggers when it comes to the people in our lives. It works great with kids. It also works really well with spouses, by the way. It's a wonderful technique that you can use to hack back those external triggers. Now, we can also use technology to hack back these external triggers that comes from our phones and our computers. Everybody's phone today comes with Do Not Disturb while driving, which is a wonderful tool to help us remove distraction by telling people that when we are focused, we hit one button, and if it's something urgent, if it's something that they really need to contact you, they will receive this auto reply that says, I'm sorry, I can't talk at the moment, I'm indistractable, but if this is urgent, please text me with the word urgent and your message will come through. We can also clear away all that desktop clutter. How many of us have desktops that look like this, right? We don't need to live like this. Psychologists tell us that all that clutter, all those tabs, all that mess can actually degrade our performance throughout the day. We can remove all that junk so that we're not constantly bombarded with those external triggers. The same goes for our cell phones. You know, 2/3 of Americans haven't taken the 5 minutes to turn off all those notifications. And instead, what we need to do is to ask ourselves this very simple question. For every external trigger in our life, we have to ask ourselves this question. Is this trigger serving me or am I serving it? And for any external trigger that we are serving, we need to get rid of that external trigger so that we only keep the ones that lead us towards traction rather than distraction. So for example, if you have a notification on your phone that says, hey, it's time to work out, it's time for that phone call, it's time for that meeting, great. Now it's serving you, it's leading you towards traction, it's something you plan to do. But if you're with your daughter, as I was, and then my phone buzzed or booped or beeped, and now I'm checking social media or email as opposed to being with someone I love very much, well, now that led me towards distraction, and it's got to go. Next thing we have to do is to, of course, adjust those notification settings. And then finally, leave those distracting devices outside of meetings, whether it's with our families at home around the dinner table. We need to claim those no phone zones, whether it's in meetings with our colleagues. If we are going to meet in person, we need to meet both in body and mind and to leave those distracting devices outside. Finally, the last step to becoming indistractable before we take some questions is to prevent distraction with pacts. Now, pacts are what we call a pre-commitment device. It's a promise we make with ourselves in advance as the last resort, as the firewall to make sure we don't get distracted. Now, The oldest recorded case of someone using one of these pacts comes to us from the story of Ulysses. Ulysses is this Greek hero in a story written by Homer over 2,500 years ago. Ulysses has to sail his ship past the island of the Sirens. Now, the Sirens are these magical creatures that sing this song that any sailor who hears the siren song crashes his ship onto the shore of the Sirens Island and dies. Now, Ulysses knows this is going to happen, and he wants to prevent himself from doing something he doesn't want to do. He wants to prevent himself from getting distracted. So what does he do? He tells the members of his ship, he tells his crew to put wax inside their ears, and he tells them to bind him to the mast of the ship, and he tells them, no matter what I do, no matter what I say, do not let me go. And you know what? The plan works. He's able to sail his ship right past the island of the Sirens and return his crew and his ship safely home. So I hope the metaphor here is sinking in. You are Ulysses. There's lots of distracting stuff out there. And of course, that could also be you there on the shores of the Sirens Island, dead. Now, you don't want to be one of those dead guys on the island. You want to figure out how to use these Ulysses pacts. The good news is that we can use tech to block out tech. There are thousands of free tools out there that help us block out distraction by helping us make a Ulysses pact. For example, I use Self-Control, this desktop tool that blocks out certain websites when I have my focused work time scheduled. On the left here, you have an app called Forest. Here's how Forest works. It's a wonderful app. Here's how it works. Every time you've got that time scheduled on your calendar for reflective work, that time that you need to protect from distraction, here's what you do. You open the app, you dial in how much focused work time you want to do, 45 minutes, an hour, however much time you want to do. And when you hit a button that says plant, this cute little virtual tree is planted. You see that cute little virtual tree? Now, here's the thing. If you dare pick up the phone and do anything with it, that cute little virtual tree dies. And you don't want to be a virtual tree murderer. So it's enough of a reminder to say, oh, no, I made a promise to myself. I'm not going to pick up my phone right now. I entered into this pact, this promise with myself. You can also find other people to enter into a pact with. So if you work with a roommate or your spouse, you can set times in your day, or when you go back to work, you can find somebody, a colleague perhaps, to work next to. Now, if you are working from home, or maybe you don't have someone to work next to, you can go online to focusmate.com. This is a product I love so much. I used it so often. I actually invested in the company. It's such a great tool. Here's how it works. Whenever you want to do your focused work you go on to focusmate.com. You pick a time in the day when you want to do your reflective work time. You sign up for that time. You're assigned a focus mate. And at that time, you better show up, because if you don't show up, you get a bad review, kind of like people, you don't want to get a bad review like you would leave a bad Uber driver or something. So you show up on time. And in that time, you see a little video feed of someone else who has the same goal of doing that reflective work time, who doesn't want to be distracted. Say, okay, what are you working on? What are you working on? Go. And for that period of time, your only job is to work on whatever you're working on without distraction. And you would not believe the power of having that other person, seeing that other person who's also busy at work, trying to stay focused. This was a session I had with a medical school student in the Czech Republic recently. So we can reduce distraction with pacts. We can actually use technology to block out tech distraction. But let me give you a word of warning, okay? Be careful. Here's why you need to be careful. Because this last technique of preventing distraction with pacts can backfire, okay? It can backfire for two reasons. Number one, if you use it in the wrong order. If you jump to making these pacts before you have taken these other three steps of first mastering internal triggers, then making time for traction, then hacking back external triggers, and then finally use this technique, that's when it's effective. So don't go out of order. The second part that trips people up is that some people, when they use these pacts, when they fail, they can't get back on the horse. They take it really hard, and they think there's something wrong with them, and they don't get back on the horse, because all of us will get distracted from time to time. Invariably, on the path to becoming indistractable, we do still get distracted. The goal is to figure out why we got distracted and do something about it so that we don't keep getting distracted in the future. But some people can't get back on the horse. Well, it turns out a common trait of those people is that they lack self-compassion. That self-compassion has been shown, people who are more self-compassionate have been shown to be much more likely to reach their long-term goals. Well, how do we cultivate self-compassion? It turns out the way to cultivate self-compassion is to talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a good friend. Maybe the way you would talk to me if I told you what happened with my daughter and how I was embarrassed that I got distracted when I was with someone I love very much. Well, what would you tell me if you were my good friend? Would you tell me that I'm a horrible father? That I'm a terrible human being? Not if you were my friend, you wouldn't tell me that. But you know what? That's the kind of stuff I used to say to myself all the time. I wasn't very self-compassionate, and it wasn't helpful, and it wasn't true. And here's what else isn't true. This idea that technology is manipulating everyone, that it's addicting us all, that it's hijacking our brains, that there's nothing we can do about it. That's not true, because there is so much we can do about it. We can master those internal triggers. We can make time for traction. We can hack back the external triggers, and we can prevent distraction with pacts. So this is just a 30,000-foot view of my book, Indistractable. There's a whole lot more in there that we didn't get to cover. We only covered the framework for about half the book. The other half of the book is about how to raise indistractable kids, how to build an indistractable workplace, and how to have indistractable relationships. So we didn't get to any of that. Maybe we can talk about some of that in the questions as well. But the message I really want to leave with you today is that we can do this. That I really do believe that we can overcome these distractions, that we can get the best out of these tools without letting them get the best of us, and that we can all become indistractable. Thank you very much. And while I take questions here, I want to ask everyone for a quick favor. It looks like almost everybody's still here, which is terrific. I'm so glad to see that. It looks like we actually grew in numbers a bit during the presentation, which is wonderful. If you could be so kind, I would love to hear what you thought of the presentation. If you can go to this URL as I take questions. The URL is opinion2.us, opinion2.us. Notice it's not .com, it's opinion2.us. If you can go to that URL, or if you have an iPhone, you can simply point it at that QR code with your camera, and it will take you to a Google form where it just asks 5 questions. Would love to know what you thought of the presentation you just saw. And when you click submit, you will be given a link to my SlideShare page where you can have all the slides you just saw. Feel free to share those with your colleagues, your family, your friends. Those are for you to keep. And if we don't get to your question for some reason, then please check out my website, nirandfar.com. But Nir is spelled like my first name, N-I-R. So that's nirandfar.com. And there's a contact form there. Happy to take any questions we don't get to today. And with that, I am very happy to open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Nir. Really appreciate it. We also have a feedback here that we show, and we ask for feedback, and we'll share that with you also, Nir. One of the questions that came in is, what is your opinion on multitasking? Chris is asking, what are your thoughts on multitasking?
Yeah, good question. I'm guessing this is a pretty educated audience. You all read a lot from what I understand. Most of you believe that multitasking doesn't work because that's what the headlines tell you, right? Every article, top 10 tips for productivity. Oh my God, if I read another article like that, I'm gonna barf. And they all say the same thing. You cannot multitask. I got news for you. It's not true. Of course you can multitask. Can you walk and chew gum at the same time? Your brain is built for multitasking if you do it correctly. How do you multitask correctly? Okay. There are 2 types of multitasking. The kind of multitasking that works is called multi-channel multitasking. Here's how this works. You see, the brain cannot absorb 2 sources of information, 2 sources of input on the same channel. It's like trying to tune into one channel with 2 signals. It's like listening to 2 podcasts, one in each ear. It's like trying to do 2 math problems at once or watch 2 television stations at the same time. You can't do it, right? Because it's on the same channel. But multi-channel multitasking, we can absolutely do. And in fact, we can use this to help us do more in our day. So when it comes to living out our values, many times what we can do with multi-channel multitasking is to overlap our values in the same period of time. Let me give you some examples. There's a technique called temptation bundling. Temptation bundling is when you take something that you usually don't want to do, something that's a temptation, that's an urge that leads you towards distraction, and you bundle it with something you do want to do. Let me give you an example. So a few years ago, I found that I had this terrible problem with going down these rabbit holes every time I would check the news, right? You go into the New York Times or CNN or whatever you like to read, and you just want to just read the news, just the headlines, right? Just real quick, let me just check on what's going on in the world. And then you find yourself clicking on one article, and then another article, and then another article. Why? Because those websites are designed to get you to consume as much of them as possible, right? They make money by monetizing your eyeballs and selling them to advertisers. We know this, but here's the thing. We can hack back. We're not victims here. We can do something about it. So what do? Technology to the rescue. There's a wonderful app that I've been using for years. I highly recommend it. It's called Pocket. Here's how Pocket works. Every time you see an article that it looks interesting, right? Don't read it on your desktop. What you do is you save it to Pocket. There's a little Chrome extension in your browser. You click the button. Once you install this Chrome extension, you click the button and it saves to your phone. Now, when it does that, it strips the text out of that article. So you don't have any other links and advertising and any of that other crap that can get you distracted. Instead, it only gives you the text. Okay, so step one, the temptation was that I wanted to keep reading articles, right? So I took the best of that temptation and I bundled it with something that, oops, can you still see me? Okay, great. And I bundled it with something I don't really like doing, which is exercise. I've never really enjoyed exercise, but I know it's part of my values to exercise. So I started doing that. So what do? Every time I want to listen to my articles, or I want to read my articles, I only can engage in those articles while I'm exercising. How do I do that? Because Pocket comes with this beautiful text-to-speech feature. So every time I'm on a walk, I'm in the gym, I'm doing my exercise, and I can't go to the gym right now because of COVID, but every time I'm doing my exercises at home, I can listen to these articles being read to me through this amazing text-to-speech functionality. So that's an example of multi-channel multitasking, right? I've got the auditory input while I'm physically doing something. So we can do this while we take a phone call with a friend while we're cooking dinner, or do all kinds of things that we can do where we can multi-channel multitask, and it can be very, very effective using this temptation bundling technique.
Thank you so much. Another quick question before we leave is, how much reflective time is a sweet spot? And are we diminishing returns if we focus on that?
So that's really specific to your job. So every job has some balance of reactive and reflective work. So for example, if you work in a call center, your job is probably almost 100% reactive work, right? The call rings, you pick it up, you handle the call, you put down the phone, right? That's most of your job. If you are a computer engineer, most of your job is reflective work, right? Because if you're constantly interrupted, that's how errors are made. That's why bugs get into a program, is because of distraction typically. So your job might be almost 100% reflective work. So it's really about the kind of job you do. But I would argue that almost every job, certainly every single knowledge worker type job, requires some amount of reflective work. The nice thing is that when you make your time box calendar, you don't make it once and then leave it like that forever. The idea here is that you refine it from week to week. You're a scientist, not a drill sergeant. And so what your job is to do is to sit down for 15 minutes a week and revise that calendar for the week ahead to make it easier to follow that calendar that you set for yourself. So if you find, that 45 minutes of reflective work time, I actually really need a little bit more, or let me move it to a different part of the day for next week. Now, in that day, you can't touch it. Once you set it for that day, you can't move it around. That defeats the purpose. But in advance, from week to week, I want you to move that time around to find the ideal calendar for you. And of course, this will change, right? As circumstances change, as important things come up, it's a good practice to have that weekly check-in with yourself to revise that time box calendar.
Thank you so much. One last question is, how can we adopt these strategies for kids?
This is a good question. I'm just actually typing in, this reminded me, I built a tool for folks, let me just type this in, to the chat for everyone. Okay, I just sent you a link there in the chat functionality for a schedule making tool that I built. It's totally free. You don't have to sign up for anything. Many people find that getting started making a schedule, a time box calendar, it looks like a big task. It's actually not that much work. It's a little bit of work up front. So I built this very easy tool that anybody can use. I just posted it in there. It's nearandfar.com/schedule-maker. So that you can use that. Now, the question about kids. This is a good one. So there's a whole section in the book about how to raise indistractable kids. And basically what we're going to do is to use the same 4 steps, right? It's the same 4 strategies of teaching them how to master internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back the external triggers, and prevent distraction with PACT. Now, I will say the best thing you can do, whether when it comes to helping other people become indistractable, is to become indistractable yourself. Whether it's as a parent, whether it's as a business leader, we cannot be hypocrites. Particularly with children. I don't know if you knew this, but children they come pre-installed with a hypocrisy detection device, right? They have these little scanners that are constantly looking for where you screw up. Right? If you have kids, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They love to find where you screw up because they're always watching. And so here's the thing. You can't tell your kids, stop playing Fortnite while you're checking Facebook and email. It doesn't work that way. We have to set a good example ourselves. And look, the fact of the matter is, if you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years, right? Our kids are going to inhabit a world that's only more distracting. Once they have virtual reality and augmented reality and who knows what else is coming down the pipes. This is a critical skill that we teach our kids because it really will be the skill of the future. So we have to arm them with the ability to decide how they spend their time and their attention. So there's a lot more here, and I'm a little bit sensitive on time. But I will give you a little taste of what's in, I think, the most important chapter of the book, which is about understanding kids' internal triggers. Because many people, we just blame the technology. We blame the video games. We blame, Instagram or TikTok or whatever. And we don't ask ourselves why kids are overusing technology. What are they looking for from overuse? And it turns out that kids are deficient in 3 psychological nutrients, that many children are deficient in 3 psychological nutrients. So just like we have physiological nutrients, we have the macronutrients of protein, carbohydrates, and fat. It turns out, according to self-determination theory, which is the most widely accepted theory on human flourishing and motivation, every psychologist on the face of the earth has heard of it. It's over 40 years old. And self-determination theory says that every person to flourish psychologically needs competency, autonomy, and relatedness. Competency, autonomy, and relatedness. And unfortunately, children these days, by and large, are deficient in these 3 psychological nutrients. They don't have enough feeling of competence in school because, one thing that's happened the last several years alongside the rise of use of cell phones and technology is also the rise of standardized testing. So kids are constantly taught to the test these days. They're told they're not competent. And what do they do to feel competent? Well, Minecraft makes them feel competent. Roblox makes them feel competent, right? Then we have autonomy. We know that this is the most overscheduled and regulated generation in history. That children today, studies have found, are more scheduled and regulated and regimented than ever before. Peter Gray did this amazing research study where he found the average American child today has 10 times the restrictions placed on them as an average adult, twice as many as an incarcerated felon. And there's only 2 places in society where you can tell people where to go, what to think, what to eat, how to dress, and who to be friends with, and that's school and prison. And so it's no surprise that when kids come home, they want autonomy, they want freedom, right? In our generation, we used to just go outside. We used to hang out. We used to just scrub around and create mischief. Well, today, people who have the money send their kids to scheduling out the nose, right? We've got soccer practice, and then we've got Mandarin, and then we've got swimming lessons, and we got football, and there's no time for them to decide what they want to do for themselves. And if you don't have the money, many parents are so terrified by the media that tells them the world is so unsafe these days and that kids can't go out and play. This is, of course, before the whole COVID crisis, that they keep kids indoors. Well, what the heck are they supposed to do indoors? So the alternative is to feel free by going online, right? You go into one of these virtual worlds, you feel like a god, you feel free. And then finally, relatedness. We know that children today, we all actually require this feeling of relatedness, to feel understood and to understand others. And there's been a collapse in the amount of time that children today get for what's called free play. Free play is when kids get to interact with each other without the direction of coaches, parents, and teachers. Now, since the 1950s, when we started keeping records of this, that time that children have for play is all but gone. And play is one of the most important things you can give your kids for their psychological health and well-being, and it's disappearing. And so where do kids go when they want that feeling of relatedness? Well, of course, they go online. They go on Facebook. They go on Instagram. They go on these tools.